I've got the power. Hi, good morning. Welcome. Thank you for coming out on a very rainy day, but this will be nice and cozy. My name is Elle Littlefield. I'm a huge recruiting nerd, basically. I'm the founder of CareerWell, and I also sit on the board of the Columbia Alumni Association, where I chair the Mentorship and Networking Committee there. I'm also a HAYVN super fan. I think I've had one form of membership or another pretty much since the start. We are so lucky to have this program and space that Felicia has built. There's really nothing else like it. The resources are just incredible. So I'm a career educator, and I'm really out to democratize recruiting information. I've spent the last 20 years building very deep recruiting expertise. I was a management consultant that was focused on human capital, and I served like global 500 organizations. I was on the global accounts team at LinkedIn. I've been a private candidate coach helping professionals make major career shifts. And of course, I've been a recruiter and an in-house recruiting leader. I really love helping people get the most out of these networking conversations because it's really sort of the first step to getting closer to your next opportunity. And even if you're not thinking about, your next play or anything like that, it's a good feeling to walk around with like, I kind of know how to have a little bit of mobility under my belt. Before we begin, I'll touch a little bit on what Leslie was talking about. So today we're going to focus on how to make the most out of these sort of planned conversations. Thursday, we're going to do that, but we're going to go a little bit deeper. I don't know about you. I like having things off of my to-do list, not having assignments. So it's like bring your laptop. We're going to optimize your LinkedIn profile on the spot using what we know about their algorithm, and also how to message on the LinkedIn platform and in general and off of it over email in order to get responses. This is sort of mainly around career conversations, but also anybody who works in sales is going to recognize that this is really coming from sort of sales truisms as well. So in our time today, I'm going to cover a couple key points that I really like helping people with. Am I supposed to be trying to talk into the camera in any way? No. Okay.
And
I care more about the people in the room.
I'm going to minimize that. There you go.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to talk about the true purpose of networking. I think everybody kind of dislikes the word networking. It can make any event sort of instantly feel a little bit gray and bland and a little bit less fun. But we're going to talk about what the true purpose of networking is. We're going to talk about just crafting your best introduction, because that's where a lot of people kind of get hesitant to go around a room because they're not sure exactly what to say and how much. And then we're going to really get into the nitty-gritty of leading these impactful conversations. What are the do's, what are the don'ts? And I have a checklist for before, during, and after. We're going to have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. But if you have questions as we go, for sure, ask away. I want you to walk away from this feeling like you know exactly what to say and how to turn conversations into outcomes. I want to start with this, though. If you've made any of the mistakes in here, you're in very good company, not to worry at all. All of the sort of the insights in here are taken from conversations with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of experienced professionals who are like, I wish I had known this earlier. I've made some of the mistakes here for sure. So it's not about, if anybody got all of these right to begin with, I'd actually be really impressed, and you should come work with me for sure. I kind of want to start with you all, and I'm curious how many people here sort of feel like they should go to more networking events, but it can feel a little bit forced and not the most fun thing to just network for the sake of networking. Yeah. You're in good company. So I have the first thing before we even talk about while you're networking and things like this, one kind of side note that I like to bring up is to choose events for their specificity. So if you work at Salesforce as a Salesforce admin, and I'm just picking on you because I sit next to her here in HAYVN, so I know exactly what she does. And I'm the beneficiary of a lot of your good conversations. But if you work in SaaS admin, and there's an event that's in New York for people that lead those kinds of teams, that's going to be much more interesting than something that's specific than something general. My college for a while, when I was graduating, they were having this event that was a happy hour for people that work in Midtown. And it was not necessarily the year of people you graduated with, not even you're in the same field. And I actually got them to change it. I was why don't you at least like focus it around different fields? Like, people that are in like the arts or in management consulting. And then that became a lot, people actually started going, for one thing. The other thing again is I just feel like the moment that you hear like the word networking, you could take the coolest event ever. It could be like your favorite band playing, unlimited champagne and caviar. And the second you call it a networking event, people are like, oh, so sometimes they still are really cool. I think actually HAYVN does a really good job of this because this is such a community-based organization that like I don't work in healthcare and I go to the HAYVN Health Summit all the time because there are people in my community that are founders, there are people that are doing interesting work. And even though sometimes they call it networking, just because like we all know each other, it's not this like faceless thing, it can be interesting. This is so comical.
Didn't it just work before? Like,
It totally did.
That's
You know
true.
what though? I'm not going to Steve Jobs it around the stage,
Sure.
so it's totally fine for me to actually
think
click a
it
button.
works.
Okay. Okay, so two types of conversations sort of come to mind when I think about networking is either you're at an event and you're having like live conversations with new people, or you have a planned conversation. You have a target company, you have a target field, you've set up the conversation in advance and you have that time set aside. That's mostly what we're going to focus on today, but the same principles definitely apply for those live ones. And exactly what we're talking about, so they go by a lot of different names. You might hear like informational interview, coffee chat, networking conversation. Every industry sort of seems to have their own lingo. And we're just going to call them networking conversations for the day. And we're just talking about things that you've set up in advance. So what is the true purpose? One of my favorite things that feels very HAYVN to me is just shaking the rust off if you've been out of the workforce for a little while, or if you're thinking about coming back to a different field, if you're exploring new fields, just getting those sort of initial conversations going so that as you move through the rest of your research or your job search process, you've kind of warmed up to having conversations with people in that field. The other thing that, hi, welcome, have a seat wherever. The other thing is great about to learn about a field or a company before you enter it. The worst way I think to learn you don't like a job is to get the job and then be there. And then your immediate thought is, how long do I have to be in this job before I change? It's a huge win to find out that you don't want to pursue something. When I was doing a second bachelor's and before that, I had spent 4 years in management consulting. I loved it. I was an analyst through an associate director. It was so cool. I didn't really have much revenue responsibility. In consulting, the more you work, the more senior you get, the more you work. And I loved the work. And so when I came out of this program, I was like, immediate, like, these are the companies I'm interviewing with. And I had 2 informational interviews. And I was like, I don't want a partner path role. Like, I don't want to get on a plane on Sunday and get back on Thursday. The kind of work that I do, that's kind of how it would be set up. And I'm so glad that I had those conversations before I took the role. And so it was kind of a huge win. But of course, the other thing is just getting yourself closer to your next opportunity. That could be, an even bigger win for sure. So the first thing we want to do really is focus on quality over quantity. I think this is another thing that happens with when we hear networking, we can feel like I need to talk to a lot of people in the room. And that can be true. It's good to not just go and have 1-2 hour conversation with someone, but maybe not. If you come to like an event here at HAYVN, I don't work at HAYVN, by the way, I just like to use it as an example because they throw great events. But if you go to an event and you have, one deep conversation with somebody that you can follow up with and really like have it back and forth and be able to ask questions, that's like worth way more than a stack of collecting business cards and a flurry. I don't think probably a lot of people in this room are prone to this, but we noticed when I first started doing alumni leadership work at my college, if we called it a networking event, the college students would be like, how many business cards can I get? And then every single person they talked to felt like they weren't capturing that person's attention. They're like, hey man, I'm like a VP at a bank and you want to go to banking and I'm not interesting to you. And so the people were sort of getting a negative impression left on them. But that quality piece, it's so much better just to have a few really good networking conversations that open the door. So if you're not getting a lot of them set up, don't worry, we're going to teach you how to lead them in a way that's going to extract the most value for your time. So it starts with a simple introduction, and I'm going to get irreverent. people love to talk about elevator pitches. What do you guys think of when I say elevator pitch?
Short and sweet.
I love that. When you think about what people have told you, you think about like an elevator ride. And I think in the past, like people have been like, you have to be really comprehensive. Like if you have an elevator pitch, you really want to give somebody like a lot of context. I think that's like what people did 5 or 10 years ago. Has anybody here ever been like asked to prepare an elevator pitch for themselves? Okay. Do you enjoy having to remember that?
No.
No. Do you enjoy getting an elevator pitch? Do you enjoy somebody like talking to you, unblinking, uncomfortable, not sure about what to say to themselves for like a solid 30 seconds? Like it can be even worse for the person receiving it. There's totally a time and a place for an elevator pitch. Like, and you know, if you're trying to get something done, you already know the person and you want to have a short summary of like your why, that's great. But I don't think it's like the right place for an intro. For this reason. So I always feel like this when somebody gives me an elevator pitch, like you don't want to do it. Nobody really wants to hear it. The pitch is here, by the way, like when people have like an 8-minute pitch, their intro of themselves is like 1 sentence. It's not the pitch. So a 1-sentence intro is really easy to remember, really easy to understand. And you just really want to tell somebody what you're doing now and what your goal is. So, you know, I've been hitting my annual quota in software sales for 3 years. Great, the person knows I'm a high performer and I'm looking to continue my path at a global organization. Sometimes people will add in their background if they're a career switcher. You know, people in like business school will say like, oh, I used to be in the Marine Corps and then I went to business school and now I'm looking to do XYZ thing. I'm so sorry about your computer. I'm just going to close this. I'm going to cancel that. We're not going to throw anything in the trash. But it's so much better. Like when I was coming out of that degree program and deciding not to go into management consulting, which was like a very easy choice, I was just like, you know, I have 5 years of experience in recruiting and recruiting leadership, and I'm looking for a sales role at a recruiting technology company. And then that landed me at LinkedIn. And I actually had a couple of people while I was interviewing saying, like, I appreciate that you're like summing it up because people can go wildly off track. And, you know, even for those of us who are like really comfortable speaking, sometimes we can find ourselves like needing to be reined in by ourselves. So now we're going to dive into how to maximize these planned conversations. And if it feels like a little bit of a mystery about how to, oh, this is interesting. That's actually wildly reformatted. Do you mind if can we switch? Yeah, that would be great.
That's just the power. I'm gonna put this here.
Great.
Lovely. Yeah. So let me undo AirPlay here. Well, actually, yeah, undo.
Well, while they're doing that, so I'm curious, how many people are sort of thinking of this as more of like sales lead generation, or how many people are thinking more about like sort of career exploration? How many people are thinking more career exploration? Yeah. What about sales lead gen? Yeah. It all kind of, you know, comes down to Sandler method, but it is kind of nice sometimes to have these conversations and at least to know how to manage these conversations. How are we doing? Yep, that's perfect. Yeah, lovely. And all right. I should also ask, is there anyone in the room who has like kids or friends who are in the job search right now? Yeah. Like maybe not also given the current climate. So this is really good information to share. So that's why we're kind of focusing it more on like the career side of things. So this is crazy, but people get nervous and forget to thank people for their time, and just check that off the list right away. It totally changes the whole tempo of the conversation. Have your brief introduction. I think we covered that. Always, you just want to research all 3 of these: the person, the company, and the field. I don't think I've ever had a networking conversation where I didn't look at their LinkedIn profile. One thing that's interesting is if they may or may not look you up. if they do look you up and you have mutual connections and like they're the one that catches it, not you, it can be like a little bit embarrassing. You want to be able to be like, oh, I see. Oh, we have Felicia in common. That's so interesting. If they're noticing it, it can kind of call attention to being unresearched. If you're having a conversation, I want to caveat this because you don't want everything to be something that you have to like go into a deep rabbit hole with. If you're looking at a functional role, like you want to be an HR manager and you're talking to somebody who's an HR manager in metals and mining, and that's not your field, but you're potentially interested in that company, you don't have to like become an expert in metals and mining. It's more about like understanding a bit about the company that they work for, and certainly about them. You want to catch any commonalities. This is something that sometimes people don't do because they can feel a little obsequious, like they don't want to feel like they're kind of, being overly flattering. But, the reason for the call is that you admire something about them and that they have something to share with you, and just lead with like, here's why I reached out. I'm really excited to see that this is your role. I'd like to learn about your path to there, and get them talking about themselves. People, if you can get somebody talking about themselves for 10 minutes straight and they don't learn a thing about you, they will walk away being like, Ella's so smart. I love talking to her. She's the best. I should move her on in the process. That was good. The true reason here is really about developing rapport. And we're going to talk about employee referral programs in a moment, which figures really, really heavily in here. But that's going to be on our roadmap slide next. You're really looking to demonstrate that you're a candidate to recommend. Has anybody here ever been a hiring manager? Have you had people that you've hired for on your team? This is awesome. So, like you'll have, if you have 2 openings, you might end up with like, 10 to 20 people that you interview. And there's maybe 5 people where you're like, I think I would extend an offer. People can really blend together after you spent a lot of time interviewing them. And having somebody else, if you have somebody else that you work with in that organization, go, oh, I had like an informational chat with this guy, John. He seems really nice. He seemed like very proactive, very interested in the company, really interested in like learning about like what it takes to get to like a mid or senior position. Just having that like outside voucher can really do a lot for your candidacy. I think we covered the elevator pitch. This is huge. Don't ask questions that you can find on your own. And in particular, you want to ask questions really that only that person can answer, that's going to help you in your job search. So if you, get my husband does a lot of informational interviews because I make him, because I do this kind of work and because I work with students as well. And he works in an investment bank and there's a ton of college students that want to be banking. And like the last thing that he is that's gonna help him like recommend is somebody's like, what's it like to, what does Evercore do? It's like, okay, that's something you want to research before. This is like probably my biggest one. If there's anything you take away from today, like never ever ask somebody to edit your resume. Never send somebody a resume and be like, can you take a look at this and see what you feel, what it looks like. I don't think any of us here, I'm a job nerd, like through and through. When I worked at LinkedIn, people were like, wow, you're really into recruiting. I don't even like editing resumes. So like, if I don't do it, I sort of doubt anybody's like, I hope that I get a chance to edit a resume again. It comes across, first of all, as I'm not fully polished. Almost every college that I'm aware of has like continuing career services, and it's also super easy if you're changing fields. My favorite thing to do, let's say you're in sales now and you're thinking like, oh, I really want to be in like the product marketing side. If you Google resumes, especially if you can find examples through business schools that are like very, very tested. You don't want to just take anything off the internet, but like make sure the formatting matches, ask a friend to or whatever. If the time comes to send your resume to somebody, if somebody says, we have an employee referral program, I would love to, submit you, send me your resume. It's totally fine to say, hey, this is my resume. If there's anything that looks like it's like, not on brand for your company, I'm happy to make any edits, but it's, fully ready to go. That comes across totally different than like, hey, can you proofread this for me? Like the answer is like, you've lost the conversation at that point. It also just feels like terrible. Like when people ask me, like, can you edit my resume? Like I feel bad because I know that they want help. And then I have to like craft like a friendly way of being like, I really can't. This is huge. You don't want to put someone in a position where they're going to say no. So you don't want to say like, okay, Katie, do you, I'm really interested in being a sales. Hi, how are you? Come on in. Welcome. I'm really interested in being a Salesforce admin. Do you have can I get an interview? Can I have a job? If she's like, the answer to that is no. Like that's going to make that an unproductive conversation. I have not built rapport. There are other things you can do to advance it, but you just don't want to ask directly. You can certainly ask around it like, oh, this is so interesting. I love this kind of work. Do you think there's openings coming up in your company, on your team or elsewhere? Would love for you to keep me in mind. I'll follow up. I'll send you my resume. If the person is interested, they will jump on that as like an open opportunity to say like, oh yeah, that would be great. Let me submit you as a warm lead. Obviously, you don't want to get too personal. This is like so obvious to all of us in the room, but for some reason I've seen over the last 2 years, people have sort of like swung the opposite direction with the pendulum. So for a long time, it was like, we can't ask anything. Everything is very sensitive. Everybody gets offended. And now I've noticed there's like a subset of people that are like, well, I'm certainly not supposed to like ask about this, but like, and then they ask. And I don't know. I think that there's like a sense of like, we overcorrected for so long that people are trying to swing the pendulum back. And I just wouldn't do that. Obviously political, but I will say, I think if it's relevant to the job, I actually would explore it. If you're going to work for, like a Catholic-based charity and you have like very strong values around that, you're like, once you're far enough in the process, I think it totally does make sense to like check in and be like, here are like a couple things that can kind of come up in this role. Here's kind of where I usually sit to sound like it dovetails like with your organization. You're probably not, for legal reasons, ever going to get someone that says, no, that's a deal breaker. Like their legal team is not going to let them say that. But if they go like, oh, I don't know, like we have all different kinds of people, or you'll hear somebody go like, yeah, that's part of our mission statement. It's really important to us that, A, B, and C, like if you're looking at lobbying jobs, it should be fairly obvious what it is. But, if it's something that is like like it's hugely important to you and even tangentially relevant, and you would feel really uncomfortable with like, keeping something a secret, like I think it's kind of better to get it out before you accept a role. Okay, so we talked about research the person and the field. Reaching out strategically is kind of going to be like the main part of our workshop on the 26th, but I do definitely want to touch on that. My biggest thing is if you ask people for 10 minutes, you're going to get, or 5 minutes, you're going to get a way higher response rate. Sometimes people want to be really generous. If they're asking for a conversation, they'll say like, oh, I'd love, especially if it's like through a community, they'll be like, can I take you out for like lunch or coffee? And, I would love to find out more about like this kind of work. And we all know what our week looks like. We would rather give that hour to like someone we already know, or to ourselves, or to our family. The shorter, the smaller the ask, just, I saw that this is the kind of work you do. Here's my background. Would you be able to chat just for 5 or 10 minutes about your path at this company? I would love to learn more about that. That is, it's gold. I was running a seminar like this at Columbia, and on the way in, my husband was like, oh, it's funny, I'm actually talking to one of the students from your school today. And I was like, oh, thank you. Like, and I thought it was because I was like about to go give a workshop there. And he goes, no, it's just because the guy asked for 5 minutes. Everybody else was like, I would really appreciate it. Let me take you out to dinner. And he's like, I don't know who you are. Send a calendar invite in advance. I think that it's nice just to kind of assume it's on the phone. I think we kind of all have Zoom fatigue at this point. It also just makes it so much easier. If you do for some reason send a Zoom, like you can always do it non-video. Certainly if they ask you to set it up that way, that's great. I would always include a link to your email profile in your email signature, even if you don't actually have an email signature like on your email client. Just when you're typing back and forth, just add it, best, Elle Littlefield, and then just like paste that link right there so that they can like research you easily. And especially if you're having these conversations, at the very least, just have in your headline something that they can like remember that would make it relevant. If your LinkedIn profile is like, if you took 5 years off when you had kids and you were in falconry before, and now you're looking to do product management, good to just like update like, product management professional or something like that so that they can see it's relevant. Especially if it is in person, dress up. This is another thing that we're seeing, I think, because obviously post-pandemic, things have become a lot more lax with regard to how people dress at work. But for these, you'll gain absolutely nothing by being less dressed. We had, through our Mentorship and Networking Committee, we had an incredible candidate at Columbia who didn't win an offer to come back after a summer. She was really good. It had nothing to do with her performance. The team had like some riffs and things like that. And we hooked her up with a couple of alumni for conversations. And she came in the middle of the day, and she came down to Midtown to an investment bank and was in what was described as like a really nice t-shirt and jeans. And it was like, it was like, and it was so uncomfortable for the alumni who were interviewing her and doing these informationals, because it doesn't feel like an era where you can just be like, you are so underdressed, we cannot possibly, like, it feels very strange for like a grown adult to give like a young woman feedback on her outfit, but like there's nothing to be gained there. Introduce yourself briefly, and then this is the other probably like main highlighted thing of our whole session today is let them know where you are in your process. Has anyone here ever worked at a place where you had an employee referral program? Okay, you could make a lot of money at, like referring people in. So I worked consecutively at Salesforce and then at LinkedIn, and it was like orientation. They were like, who do you know that wants to be an account executive? Like they had the recruiting team come in. They're like, we need to, they were growing super rapidly. And, you know, at the time, like I knew a ton of other people that were interested in it. Here's the catch, and here's why it's important to let somebody know. And in your outreach to say, like, I'm interested in exploring these roles, not I've already applied. Once you drop your resume, that person cannot submit you. It doesn't count, and they don't get the, sometimes it's $2,000, sometimes it's $5,000, sometimes it's $10,000. If you get somebody who's like, okay, I'm gonna take a look at their LinkedIn profile. This is somebody who actually might be a contender. Like, I'm not sure for what role, but like maybe that's like potentially a couple $1,000s in your pocket. And then you get like a VIP coach, essentially. Like everybody who I sent through an employee referral program, I was like, okay, this is what they're gonna ask you. Like, how would you respond? And I like took a lot of extra time way beyond that initial conversation to make sure that they were really well prepped. And it was awesome. If this is like one of the juiciest things you can do is if you have a target company, definitely you can look up, it's usually public information if they have an employee referral program. These are the people when you're like messaging them on LinkedIn that are gonna be like, you're interested in a sales manager role? Yeah, I can totally chat, especially if you say, you know, I've seen there's some interesting openings, haven't applied to anything yet. And then have a few questions ready just to, I mean, I'm like maybe a 99th level extrovert. Maybe my husband would say like 99.9. I even like get flustered sometimes, like once you get past the introduction. So I always have like a question or two that I've like bullet pointed out just to get them talking about themselves. I think there's also a little bit of like the conversation around this lately misses a little bit of the nuance. So it is really interesting to like get them talking about themselves. But to ask somebody, like if you're asking a managing director at a consulting firm, like what are the most interesting transactions that you worked on this year? First of all, if there's a big level difference, like it's not going to tell you anything about like what your job would be. And the other thing is like their wins are like not going to really tell you anything about what the job is. So, questions like, is there such thing as like a typical day in the life or a week in the life? What would that look like? My favorite question, especially if you are having a conversation with somebody who's not lateral but a bit more senior, is if you're looking at like, here are the roles that you think you're applying to and here are the roles that they're in. Like, if you're like, I understand this is sort of like what makes somebody successful here. What do I need to know to like kind of keep moving up? How does that job change? One thing that I find so mysterious that I really want this to become like more a part of like the conversation, especially for like college students and entry to mid-level professionals, is so many jobs that like we kind of see around in Lower Fairfield County. The entry level job straight out of college or business school is completely different from the partner job. Like they are almost unrelated. So if you're an investment banking analyst, like you're an Excel machine, you need to understand like all kinds of an analysis.
There's no sales component to your role at that point. You're probably not in the room with clients at all for pitch meetings, like for years. And then when you're a partner, you're like, I'm sure the analyst like ran some kind of model at some point, but your whole job is out there pitching. So it's really interesting. I think it's a really prime opportunity if you get somebody who's kind of on the other side of that tipping point from where you are to be like, okay, here's what I like about this role, but I have my eye on what's down the road. What makes somebody really successful in this one? Hi. This is a really good one. So again, it's probably not going to be the best move to like ask directly for a job. But I love the move of, at the end, thanking them for their time, telling them what you got out of it. And just, is there anyone else you think I should speak to? Because they might not think of it. They really might not. We all, our to-do lists are just like dragging like a CVS receipt at this point. But if you've made a relatively good impression, they might be like, you know what, I actually don't have, or, maybe you're talking to a sales manager and they're hiring for account executives and like you're also closer to their level. And so like they're not going to be looking at hiring you. Like they might not think to necessarily offer it up, but if you're like, I'm interested in sort of like a junior manager role, they might be like, oh yeah, you know what, not my business unit, but the next one over seems like a really great place. I'd be happy to set you up with a conversation there. And that can get also their wheels thinking about the referral program if they have one as well. And it's also not like if they go like, let me think about it, it's like you're not really putting somebody on the spot like too much, because if they're like, I can't think of anyone offhand, that feels really different as a no than like, I don't have a job for you right now. That's such like an all caps thing to say to somebody. We all know, follow up by email to thank them. Ideally that day, I always just tee it up beforehand. Like I have in my Apple Notes, like a general form, and I customize it a little bit, and I just keep it in my like drafts so that I can fire it off right away. I've heard a lot of people recently talk about the idea of, and by the way, if anybody wants this, I'm happy to like send this out as a checklist afterwards. Yeah. I've heard a bunch of people recently say like it's great to just set yourself apart with a handwritten note. I would not do that. Or like a gift. I think a gift can come off as like a little bit like too much. And the handwritten note, like every corporate job I've had, and here at HAYVN, like I don't even know where my mailbox is. Like I think that that's something that would just get lost in the sauce. Maybe if you're interviewing with like a stationery company, I'm sure there's like an exception somewhere. The other thing I think is super important is to update them when you accept an offer, especially if you're like remotely in the same field, and definitely if you get a job at that company. When I was at CEB, which is now Gartner, my friend's little sister, who's just amazing, and she's now a head of HR because that's how long ago it was. She applied straight out of Northwestern and she got the job, and she didn't tell me. And then she like got there and I was like, you work here? Like, I was like, I feel so out of the loop. And she was like, well, I didn't know if you'd be like interested. I was like, no, I like would have come, like they usually ask like if there's somebody that you've helped along the way, if you want to like come speak at orientation. I was like, oh, I just like, I feel a little out of the loop. So it's not irrelevant. And honestly, if you enjoy the conversation at all, even if you end up going into something really different, it's just like a nice touch. It makes somebody feel like they're glad they spent their time with you. So if you're interested in like a slightly deeper dive here, so again, I'm a big fan of like the working session. And I actually used to do these kind of sessions when I worked at LinkedIn for our clients, because shockingly, usually the people with like the most complete LinkedIn profiles are the employees of LinkedIn, and everybody kind of wants to have their profile updated, but it's not like totally clear, I think, where to focus. And we have incredible heat maps and understanding of the algorithm of like what is high impact. And it also doesn't have to be long. Like I don't think a LinkedIn profile has to be lengthy and has to read like a resume. So we'll just do that together. We'll look at a bunch of other ones as well. And then the other thing that we're going to do like actual scripting for is like the messaging on the network. Like how do you get a response? How do you actually search for people at target companies? One thing I do want to mention actually is, when you go to LinkedIn and you go to a company like HAYVN and it's like Malou works here and Felicia works here. For this reason, if you really have not enjoyed working with someone and they send you a LinkedIn invite, accept it, because you want to know if they work at a place that you're considering. And if you're having like these networking conversations and it's somebody that you maybe kind of like butted heads with a little bit, and that's your mutual connection, like just kind of want to be like aware that that is the case. I think it's like the opposite of like Facebook or Instagram or whatever's next, where like, listen, if this is somebody I've really butted head with, like I'm not going to follow them anymore. Like I will never let go of those connections of people that I maybe didn't have the best connection with. So that's coming up on June 26th. You can register at HAYVN.com. I also have my own course coming out called Master Your Job Search, and it goes through identifying target roles, preparing your materials, preparing to launch, apply and repeat, which shockingly turns out to be like one of the biggest levers there, acing the interview and landing the offer. So it's like foundational and general. So if there's something that's highly technical that you're interested in, there's a good chance that there's going to be like above and beyond training. Like if you're looking at investment banking jobs, training the street, or management consultant for management consulting. But this is really good for almost any kind of knowledge worker job. And it's designed to be self-paced and mobile friendly. So you can just take it at your convenience. How are we on time? We've got 15 minutes left. Does anybody have questions, or is there anything honestly that you would add to for here? Because we have hiring managers in the room. What are things that like you might add to this?
I've ended some interviews with, do you have any concerns for me for this role?
Oh, I love that.
I kind of feel like it goes against what you're saying.
So I've actually almost always ended my interviews, like with the final round, with a variation of that, and said like, I'm positive that this is the right role for me. I've heard A, B, and C are like the core competencies. Are there any questions that I can answer for you about me that we haven't surfaced yet? It's like objection handling in advance. I don't know if I would say concerns, because
But I don't like.
yeah, they probably, again, like, you know, different hiring managers have all gotten different guidance from like a legal team or lack of guidance, and then gone gone to Google and been like, what can I ask and not ask? But if somebody says concern, I'd be like, well, it's almost like the presumption is that not that you were doing anything presumptuous, but it almost implies that like the role should be yours and they have to have a concern to not have it. This is like a little tangential, but we recently like hired an interior designer, and we were like trying to choose between two. And one of them was like, okay, like the one that we didn't choose was like, what were your concerns? And I was like, it's just, we were just going to hire one person and the other person was a better fit. And so you did nothing wrong. You think you're awesome. But yeah, I do actually really like the idea of just being like, are there any, but that would be more for like an actual interview question. I do think that's a really strong way to end though.
But I did start more with the way you are, and that just came about in an interview last week. So I'm going to go back to my original script.
One thing that I actually really love that's a different variation on that, and especially if you've already surfaced that, and sometimes people will be really honest. They'll be like, you know, it seems like you've worked in like a slower paced environment. This is really fast. There's a lot of travel. Like, how much do you know about how that would like land with your life? Like, just as an example.
Yeah,
and then you can,
there's one other candidate that she's interviewing, and that their background was more B2B, which mine is more B2C.
Yeah. So one thing that I like to ask that I think can overcome objections without directly surfacing them is, if at the end of an interview process, like, what was the role that you were interviewing for?
I've forgotten the abbreviation for the marketing term, but it was handling accounts.
So it was like a B2B account management type of role?
Yeah.
So if you say like, okay, I understand, like throughout the interview process, I understand like, here are the core parts of the role, here's kind of how the pace goes, and here's how the team works, here, what are the clients are like you kind of reiterate all the things that you think like this person has to really understand this to get an offer. And then you just say, so I understand that's what the role is. What do you really need on your team? Like, did you just lose 3 people because they moved and you need somebody who can just gobble a lot of work up really fast? Or, you know, do you need somebody who's going to like come on and just, you know, be a really good long-term fit, and, you know, you don't want to have to like replace me in a year? Because you know, we all have our own biases as hiring managers. Like, you might be like, down 3 people and then there's like 2 people going on mat leave and you're like, I just need somebody who can handle it. And then they start to tell you about their pain a little bit of like, here's what's like really under the surface of the role. And these are things that are like totally fine for them to share, where they're like, yeah, listen, this team has like turned over a lot, and you know, now we've got a new manager in place and we think that we've sort of stopped the bleeding, but XYZ. And then the clincher is you speak to that, you go, okay, I totally get that. So I hear you just need somebody who can like come on right away, and you just come up with an example from your background. Like, you know, at my last company, like I came down, we were even 3 people short for the first year, and it's fine, I get it, and I can help you with, you know, hiring too. Like that, you speaking directly to like, here's what this person's personal pain is. I almost like feel bad for people like that come after you not asking that, because that hiring manager is going to remember like that person was not just concerned about like getting the job for themselves, but like, what am I dealing with? Because we've all, you know, had coworkers come and go, and it's just like, you're like, okay, you know. And you can also ask them like, what do you think the team is wishing for? Like, what kind of person? I mean,
Yeah, it was
yeah.
just for planning events, and my background with the American Marketing Association, doing that role is what I focused on the thank you note.
That's awesome. And you can also ask, you know, if you have an opportunity to discuss further. I love like career pivots. I think that like when people come from different backgrounds, it can add so much to a team as long as they're really clear on what the role is. If you can ask like, you know, when you've brought other people on the team with like a B2C background before, like how did they really just nail the role? I moved from management consulting into like a direct quota carrying role at Salesforce. And to be honest, I got really lucky because they happened to be like massively expanding in the New York office. I don't think I would have been up for that kind of role otherwise. But they were like, okay, you know, she really understands SaaS. She really understands this. And like, we can teach you to sell. We've got boot camp. And I came in, they had a role that they called a sales engineer, which was like their closest understanding to like what I had done. And I was like, you know, when you've hired people that are sales engineers to be quota carrying, like, tell me about some of those hires that you've made that are rock stars. And then they just started talking about people on their team that were awesome. So like in their head, they were like, oh, it's going to be like Adam Frank. And so that, I think it's really good. Yeah, it's really good. You're kind of just like, you're not really tricking them, but you're like tracking them into building a vision of how you would succeed in it. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sure.
Go ahead. How do you suggest inbound requests from hiring managers that come into your LinkedIn profile?
That's great.
How do you
yeah.
suggest handling that?
So it would be from a hiring manager or a recruiter?
Probably a recruiter or something. What's the difference? A recruiter is just general hiring manager at an actual company?
Yeah. So recruiters can either work for the company or be at a staffing firm. Usually it's the recruiter that will reach out, not the hiring manager. The recruiter kind of like sets up and pre-screens a slate of candidates for the hiring manager, so that the hiring manager is going to sit down, interview, and make a decision, but they kind of like tee it all up. And they do exactly what you're talking about, which is like search. Yeah. Sometimes at really small companies, like hiring managers do have to do it themselves, and that's not a deal breaker. The first thing that I would say is, I say this with a lot of love because I love being a recruiter and I love my recruiting community. Recruiters are sometimes not great at like understanding like candidate positions. So like people will reach out and be like, great, send me your resume. And you're like, I've been in the same role for 4 years. I don't have an updated resume. You reached out to me. Like, why are you asking for my resume? I would ask for if it seems at all interesting, I would ask for like, oh, what role is this for? You know, can you send me the listing? Mm-hmm. And then if it seems at all interesting and you're in the market, like, oh, let's like have a quick chat about it. Absolutely. I mean, that's awesome. And it's not uncommon if you have, you know, if you've worked at like a Vanguard type of firm and you have particular experience, it's not uncommon for those to be fully legit. But I would just say it depends on if it's interesting to you.
And if it's not, you still just respond and say, I'm not interested at this time. I mean,
no, I don't.
Just blow them off.
I just archive it.
I love when they read down a list of, do you have experience with this?
Right, you're like, did you look at my profile? If it seems like spam, I would say like not interested. I would click the not interested and decline without sending a response, just because your time is valuable. Right. If it seems like at all, if it's like telemarketing and you're like, I'm an attorney, what is happening? the way that the recruiter license works on the platform is like they track their success metrics. So if it's really a misfit and they should have known that, it's good to just decline so that they have an opportunity to like learn that they have to target differently. But I wouldn't worry. Their feelings are not hurt. In fact, if anything, what's interesting is if you reply, they're like, I got to reply. And then it's you saying no. So like, you know, you're not like ghosting them. It's not that bad. Yeah.
I was gonna ask, assuming one does his or her research on the types of recruiting agencies or firms.
Yeah.
What they specialize in, for more senior positions, what's like the right way to reach out to them?
To a recruiting
Like a
agency.
steward or
Yeah.
someone, because we're focusing a lot on LinkedIn, and I just know
Yeah.
from experience that like my company, we didn't use LinkedIn for very senior positions.
And they never do.
Yeah.
My favorite thing is I think everybody who is like mid-career or more senior should have a relationship with recruiters, with a couple good recruiters, because you'll see that it's going to be like the same people that stick around your industry for a while. And I would ask around, like, to the degree that you can with colleagues, you know, people that you're quite friendly with and friends that you know in the field, and find somebody to talk to and trust. I mean, I think that I probably, even when I was very much not looking for a role, would, you know, respond to, there were like 2 or 3 recruiters that, you know, just kind of would like run opportunities by me, like, oh, you sure you don't want to move? And I would have, you know, lunch with them like once a quarter. Not each one of them, but like once. I think it's really good to keep a warm relationship with an executive recruiter. Are you local here?
I am.
I mean, I would also, you could post anonymously on Moms of Darien and be like, hey, like looking for, does anybody have or not anonymously, you know, just like, does anybody have a great, you know, executive search person? I'm just, you know, interested in exploring other things. I think it can be really great to keep that in your back pocket. And you're absolutely right. Yeah. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Oh, sure. The other thing that's great, by the way, is like having a good relationship with a recruiter. You can get so much good intel. Like you can, even if they come to you and they're like, oh, here's a role that like, you know, in your heart that they were like, this is a long shot that this person would be interested in role. Like it's a location change, or it's not that much of a step up, or, you know, it's not your kind of firm. Like they are kind of the canary in the coal mine sometimes, seeing cuts and things like that, and just seeing changes in the field. So I just think they can provide really good comp direction too, because they're getting comp information directly from your firm, from their competitors. And if you're like, that's interesting, and they're like, that's what's competitive right now. Like if it's somebody that you have a good relationship with, that you've known for years, like they're much less likely to say that just to get you to take the job, because they've like built their relationship with you. So you know, there's a lot of really good recruiters out there. You could probably actually go onto like the Spencer Stewart website. Like they have a huge office here. There's probably a ton of those folks actually working in Fairfield County, and just reach out and say, hey, like, you know, I've been in the field for, you know, X number of years, like kind of interested in touching base about like industry trends. Do you want to get coffee? And they'll probably be like all over it. Yeah. Anybody else? Anything else you would like add here?
Well, I'm a closet extrovert, right?
A closet extrovert? Tell me
Yeah,
about
like I
that.
can only turn it on for so long.
Mm.
But like I was at Tech Week in New York, and I was
That's like
prompting
exhausting.
for marketing class, and like there's a whole list of stuff going on. So at the end of class, I'm like, you know, what events are people going to? And you know, someone in like her late 20s, early 30s came over to me, and she's like, so there's other events?
Oh yeah.
And then, you know, she was my buddy, and then we
That's
picked up
awesome.
another buddy at the next place. And those are the people I'll remember.
Totally.
And
It's
you know,
really
I
nice.
sent the thank you note, or the nice to meet you note, to everyone there. That's like a big accomplishment for me.
That's
I'm not
huge.
great at, it's easy to meet people, but following up and.
Totally agreed. Yeah. Well,
I have a quick question.
yeah, please go ahead.
I'm always challenged at networking events, just like I am at parties,
Mhm.
to not be stuck with a group. Because you're always,
Oh.
there's groups all chatting together. And, to break away and get to the other group, because it's been nice talking to these people, but I realized this is not going to get me anywhere. If it was a job thing,
Totally.
you kind of have to move on. It's.
And you don't want to be like,
Well,
peace, and just walk away.
I think
Yeah.
you get out of a conversation, but it's challenging. People pretty much stand in the same
Yeah.
place. And it's really challenging sometimes to work.
I
those
totally
rooms.
agree. My go-to, and I'm actually curious, I'm sure that there's people in this room that are also really good at this. I always just say, I'm gonna refresh my drink and
Yeah.
walk away, because it's like, nobody's gonna have a comment about like how much liquid is in your glass. And it's sort of like it's like a signal of like, I'm gonna mingle a little bit. I just like to say I'm gonna refresh my drink.
Sometimes I'm self-deprecating and be like, I don't want to monopolize your time.
Totally.
I'll let you speak to other people, like.
Yeah, if somebody really won't stop talking to me, I think that's a really good one too. Like, because then you're kind of signaling like, this conversation is gone.
Well, yeah, the opposite of what he said. You wanna get into this group, but you see everybody in a circle chatting to each
Yeah.
other, and how do
Hard to
you,
break in.
yes, how do you get in?
You start breakdancing.
May I join you?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
love, I
I
mean,
think that's
exactly,
fine.
yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And also maybe like do a little lap and come back. Like if somebody might be like in the middle of a story and like you kind of can keep your ear peeled for like when it seems like there's a lull, but we're like in Lower Fairfield County, like everybody in this room is probably like tremendously good at this. We're not like 17, like what is the first networking event I'm gonna go to, and do I know how to iron yet? Like we're all in really good shape. But yeah, it can be tough to actually like say the words, but
Because if you go to a networking event,
Yeah.
the idea is you're supposed to be, I think,
Mhm.
meeting with the more than just a couple of people that
Yeah.
are there. And it's just sometimes it's just difficult and maybe transparent, and
Yeah.
maybe you seem shallow because you're bailing on these conversations.
I think sometimes it's also like people will go and they have anxiety about making their way around the room. So they're like, okay, you're talking to me. I'm going to double down on this conversation. We're going to talk about sailing. We're now like, let's say we both work in, he sits catty corner to me. And we just discovered this morning, we both sail. So like, we might be at an insurance event. I'm like, okay, let's talk about sailing. This is like, I feel safe now. I don't have to mingle around the room. And meanwhile, you're like, I'm actually here to talk to agents. Like, I think it's just totally fine just to
There's
be
nothing wrong with just saying, okay, we're connected on LinkedIn, let's go meet some other people.
totally.
Or I
Yeah.
think another thing I like to do is look for that person who's wandering around refreshing their drink.
That's a
Right,
really
so
good
make
one.
eye contact and try to welcome them in and say, oh, and we were just catching up about this and that, because that helps them.
It also makes you look so good in front of people to be like, oh, hey, come join us. Like that's the person you want to like get to know more and hire. Like I always like look for those people, and like, yeah, I think that's a really
I'm that person walking around enough, but it's not,
Yeah.
where can I break in? But I think if you open it up, that makes it easier for people too.
And those people have a sense of where they are in the conversation, so you're not waiting for that point where you're not interrupting, like just the
Yeah.
word that comes to the
Exactly.
table and not.
Yeah.
"Oh my gosh, this is
Right.
a horrible moment."
I totally agree. Yeah. And I think there's like a butterfly effect, because if you're like, let's say you're with 6 people and you see that, you're like, oh, do you want to come join us? Let's say there's 2 hours left of the party. I think other people then might do that. So now you've kind of changed the whole dynamic of the party, because you've like let people know like, oh, this is how we're going to work. I think that sometimes like social settings, it just takes one of us animals to be like, here's the rules to how we're going to, do this. And then you
start shifting.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
makes it easier for someone to peel off too.
Totally.
Because there's a break.
Exactly. Thank you guys so much. I'm so happy to have
Thank
you.